So just as a heads up, as I read Luke 5:27 to 6:11, watch out for the four encounters that Jesus has with the scribes and the Pharisees here, which is raised in the question. Listen out for the reasons for their growing opposition to Jesus and the truths and principles that Jesus is teaching that flesh those out. So let's read Luke 5:27 to 6:11. After this, Jesus went out and saw a tax collector by the name of Levi sitting at his tax booth. "Follow me," Jesus said to him. And Levi got up, left everything, and followed him. Then Levi held a great banquet for Jesus at his house, and a large crowd of tax collectors and others were eating with them. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who belonged to their sect complained to his disciples, "Why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners?" Jesus answered them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but those who are ill. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." They said to him, "John's disciples often fast and pray, and so do the disciples of the Pharisees, but yours go on eating and drinking." Jesus answered, "Can you make the friends of the bridegroom fast while he's with them? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. In those days they will fast." He told them this parable: "No one tears a piece out of a new garment to patch an old one. Otherwise they'll have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new one will not match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. Otherwise the new wine will burst the skins, the wine will run out, and the wineskins will be ruined. No, new wine must be poured into new wineskins. And no one after drinking old wine wants the new, for they say, the old is better." One Sabbath, Jesus was going through the cornfields, and his disciples began to pick some ears of corn, rub them in their hands, and eat the grain. Some of the Pharisees asked, "Why are you doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" Jesus answered them, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, and taking the consecrated bread, he ate what is lawful only for the priests to eat, and he also gave some to his companions." Then Jesus said to them, "The Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." On another Sabbath, he went into the synagogue and was teaching, and a man that was there whose right hand was shriveled. The Pharisees and teachers of the law were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal on the Sabbath. But Jesus knew that what they were thinking and said to the man with the shriveled hand, "Get up and stand in front of everyone." So he got up and stood there. And Jesus said to them, "I ask you, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy it?" He looked round at them all and then said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He did so, and his hand was completely restored. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law were furious and began to discuss with one another what they might do to Jesus. So here are these four conflicts between Jesus and the religious leaders. And they relate to various things. One is to Jesus eating with the tax collectors and sinners. One is to the fact that his disciples aren't fasting. One is with the disciples picking corn in the fields on the Sabbath. And the other is healing on the Sabbath. They're all issues around the laws that the Pharisees had created in order to be able to keep God's law. But in each instance, Jesus is driving at the heart the principle of God's law as it collides with the laws that they were keeping. And so you can understand why they wouldn't want to associate with those who are unfaithful to God. But Jesus is saying, actually, we need to win those who are unfaithful to God. That's exactly why he's come. He's come to heal the sick. It's them that need him as the doctor. The Pharisees are concerned about fasting, which was an appropriate sign of repentance and an expression of need for God and the greater priorities. Jesus says, "I am the greater priority. Why would you fast when I'm here? But when I'm gone, there's a time to fast." The disciples are serving with Jesus as they're traveling on the Sabbath. They pick the corn and they're hungry. It's right to eat and to be fed as you are in service. But it breaks the law of working on the Sabbath, according to the Pharisees. And then Jesus heals this man with the withered hand. What's more important, the law of the Sabbath or healing? And so we see the spirit of who Jesus is and what he's come to do constantly colliding with the laws of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law. And that's brought to a nub in this parable that's told in the middle of this the new wine in the old wineskins. And the fundamental issue is this: the old wineskins are brittle, they've gone hard over time, there's no flexibility in them. And so when you pour the new wine in, which is going to be fermenting, which is going to be alive and producing gases and so on, the brittleness of the old wineskins can't cope, that they'll burst. Like the old garment with a new patch. The new patch is going to change as it's washed. It's going to shrink and move. There's still flexibility in it. The old garment, there isn't. And so you put the new patch on and it's going to rip the old. And what Jesus is teaching here is that the life that's found in relationship with him can't be constrained by the old structures and the old ways of doing things. The formal laws that the Pharisees have put in place to be able to keep the law of God. Jesus is bringing the ability to do it from the heart rather from sort of outside constraints. And so they need to be rescued by him. He's the doctor. They need to rejoice in his presence because he's here. They need to be in service with him, relying on his provision for them. They need to be doing good as he leads them to. And I just think it's worth reflecting on our current moment in terms of the coronavirus and the outside restrictions that mean that we can't do our Christian lives as we have already done, particularly our corporate Christian life. And actually, I think the challenge is here that we ought not to be relying on the rigid structures of the way we have done things. Actually, our following of Christ, that the principles of love for God and love for others, which have been enabled by Jesus, have got to be expressed in other ways. Sometimes the format needs to change. That's why from time to time I do try and change the way we do things on a Sunday, because it's the life within that's important, not the external structures. And actually what ought to happen is that constantly as things change, the reality is able to shine through, even though the circumstances have to adapt. I was just trying to think of an analogy for this. The old wineskins isn't quite so useful for us, but think of a husband and wife marrying. When they're first married, they can express their love in that context, but then the first child comes along and the circumstances change, and the way you could behave has to adapt because there's another person in the home, but your love is expressed despite the change of circumstances in different ways. The same principles are applied in new ways. And as the children grow older, as we're finding, as you go through the changing seasons, you have to adapt. You can't always run things the way you did. My time with Jane in the evening now is not as easy. Now we've got two girls at home, one's 12 and one's 14. When they were younger, they were in bed by 7, we had the evening together. We can't talk so easily then. But that doesn't mean we don't talk because the structure's gone, but the reality is still there. And life with Christ is like that. The reality at heart is still there, even though the structures sometimes need to change and we need to be flexible. So the New Testament commands us to sing. Actually, we've got very few incidents of congregational singing in the New Testament. But Paul and Silas, as they're arrested and put in prison, just burst out in song. They're singing their hearts out in prison, in the darkness. You see, the principle is we want to sing praise to God. We'll do that whenever and however we can. We're not constrained to one particular outlet. One way of doing it might be best in particular circumstances. That's good and honorable. There's nothing wrong with it. But we have to morph and change. But the principle doesn't go away. The desire doesn't go away because the structures have changed. Jesus is teaching a new way of life, which is not a religious exterior. It is not that formal religion, but is a new relationship which flexes and changes as the circumstances change, but provides ongoing life. And may we grow in that life with him through these changing circumstances. What a rich opportunity to do that now, when we have to trust in him in ways that we've not had to for a long time because things are tough, really tough for some of us, hard, difficult. We've got to think, we've got to put new things in place, we've got to adjust. It's uncomfortable and hard, but actually it's a time for us to grow in our relationship with Jesus and not to be merely relying on the externals. May God help us to grow through these difficult days.